faithfully sharing value, exploring great books from around the world. Hello, this is Sally's Book Talk. Today I'm diving into this book called Martin Eden. The author is Jack London. On an early June morning in 1875, folks in San Francisco read a terrifying newspaper article about a woman who shot herself in the temple. This woman claims she refused to abort her unborn child, got kicked out by her husband, so she made this desperate move. Luckily, she didn't succeed in suicide, just suffered some minor injuries. And this pregnant woman who attempted suicide was Jack London's mother. Jack London's childhood was really tough. Because his family was poor, he had to shoulder life's burdens early on. At age 10, he was selling newspapers on the streets. At 14, right after finishing elementary school, he started working in a cannery. Later, he worked as a sailor, joined gold rush expeditions, and was even arrested for vagrancy. These experiences gave him rich material for his future writing. At 27, his famous work, The Call of the Wild, came out, kicking off Jack London's golden era of writing. He became one of the most read and highest paid writers back then. But it all ended abruptly at 40 when he died from a morphine overdose. Thus, his legendary life drew to a close. Despite his short career in American literary history, Jack London stands with Mark Twain, Howells, Hemingway, and others. Mark Twain, Howells, Hemingway, and others are key critical realist writers of the late 19th century. His works covered diverse themes like love, wandering, war. For example, his famous The Call of the Wild brims with nature, spirit, and romanticism. Another part of his writing depicts conflicts between people and society, holding deep social meaning. For instance, this semi-autobiographical novel, Martin Eden, tells of Martin, a sailor from society's bottom, who climbs to the upper class through his writing. Yet, at the story's end, Martin, who made this comeback, didn't find fulfillment or happiness in life. What happened? Let's explore Martin's story together. Martin is a young man from society's bottom, a sailor by trade. He didn't start out wanting to escape poverty and rise up. His drive to strive awakened with the coming of love. By chance, Martin saw a young man named Arthur being harassed by a few thugs. Although they were strangers, Martin still stepped in to help him out, so he was invited to Arthur's home. As soon as he entered the living room door, Martin felt overwhelmed. This was his first time stepping into an upper-class home. Martin wore coarse clothes that smelled of seawater, completely out of place in the luxurious surroundings. He felt flustered and didn't know where to put his arms and hands. The more careful he tried to be, the clumsier he became. He nearly bumped into a piano stool in the room, and it took a lot of effort for him to calm down. But soon after, his heart jumped into his throat again. He heard Arthur say, "Ruth, this is Mr. Eden." Ruth is Arthur's sister and also the female protagonist of the novel. What was Martin's first impression of Ruth? As described in the book, she was like a pale, golden flower on a slender branch. No, she was a spirit, a fairy, a goddess. Such sublime beauty didn't belong to this world. So in Martin's eyes, Ruth possessed extraordinary ethereal beauty. Ruth was studying literature at university, and they discussed a poetry collection. Ruth spoke eloquently, using a series of critical terms and intellectual methods. Martin struggled to keep up with her words. He was amazed by Ruth's knowledge and enchanted by her gentle, beautiful face. Martin was completely captivated by Ruth, and in his heart, he cried out, "This person is worth living for, worth striving for, worth fighting for, and worth dying for." After returning from Ruth's home, Martin realized there was a huge gap between him and Ruth. Ruth lived in a grand, comfortable house, receiving a higher education, talking daily about poetry and distant dreams, while he stayed at his sister's place. The house was shabby and dilapidated, filled with the smell of soap suds and dirty laundry, echoing with his sister's scolding shouts and children's cries. His friends were all fellow bottom-tier workers. Working and drinking were their entire lives. To rise into the upper society and to be worthy of Ruth, Martin resolved to completely transform himself. His sense of personal struggle awakened. As a sailor, Martin had to go to sea for 8 months to earn a living. During those 8 months, missing Ruth, he worked while studying diligently. He helped the captain wash clothes, and in return, borrowed a complete set of Shakespeare's works. The elegant phrases in Shakespeare's works made him understand what truly refined language is. The brilliant soliloquies showed him the charm of profound thought. For a period, he became completely immersed in Shakespeare's plays, effortlessly reciting many passages. The world seemed to appear before him in dramatic form. For 8 months, Martin sailed across the vast ocean, and he saw the magnificent scenery of the Pacific. He vowed to describe this beauty to Ruth in words. So, for the first time, he conceived the idea of writing. He wanted to create great works like Shakespeare and prove himself worthy of Ruth through talent. After returning from sea, Martin immediately began writing. With his various sea adventures and rich imagination, ideas flowed freely when he wrote. He wrote from morning till night, stopping only to visit the reading room, borrow library books, or see Ruth. Full of confidence, Martin believed his works would soon be published, happily fantasizing about receiving substantial payment. But unexpectedly, dozens of his manuscripts were rejected by magazines. Struck by this setback, Martin studied successfully published works, only to be astonished by what he found. The published articles were monotonously similar, depicting mediocre life experiences, completely different from Martin's wild, passionate stories. Martin grew suspicious of the literary market. Were these magazine editors themselves mediocre, or were these authors and editors afraid of real life? Having sold no manuscripts, Martin became a laundry worker to support himself. He worked over 10 hours daily, starching hundreds of shirts and ironing every laundered garment. The grueling labor nearly stripped him of his ability to think. He was utterly exhausted each day, let alone having energy for reading or writing. 3 months later, Martin quit this job. He realized that despite setbacks, he must continue his writing journey. Because if you want to climb to the upper class, relying on cheap labor is absolutely not going to work. Martin regained his fighting spirit and started writing again. This time, he adjusted his writing plan. To earn royalties sooner, he decided to take a detour. First, cater to the market's taste, writing some shallow, unpoetic, but popular works. After earning money from these, he'd create the artistic works he truly wanted to write. How could he make his works appealing to the market? Martin discovered that popular market novels have a fixed formula, generally consisting of 3 parts. First part, a couple is forcibly separated. Second part, the couple reconciles due to some actions or events. Finally, the novel must end with wedding bells ringing. As long as you follow this formula, the chance of publication is high. He followed this formula and wrote over a dozen, short stories, sending them to magazines he knew that published such stories. Although these magazines had vulgar content, the payments weren't low. Martin waited for responses. During this period, the only thing that comforted him in life was meeting Ruth. Ruth completely disapproved of Martin's works. She thought he couldn't make a living through writing, but she was moved by his abundant energy and masculine spirit. They confessed their true feelings and became a couple. Ruth and Martin's relationship faced strong opposition from her parents. Even Arthur, who'd once been helped by Martin, didn't support his sister's romance. They told Ruth, "We can't bear to see you marry such a person. He's coarse and unrefined. Nothing about him matches your elegant character." Ruth wanted Martin to work at her father's law firm because it was a respectable, legitimate job and could earn money. Ruth tactfully persuaded Martin, "You can't make a living by writing. We can't get married relying on such things. To sabotage Ruth and Martin's relationship, Ruth's parents often invited Martin and other successful men to their home at the same time. Their aim was to make Ruth realize how inferior Martin was through comparison. At the banquet, Martin discovered that these so-called noble figures were nearly wealthy idlers. All they talked about was cards, billiards, cocktails, cars, and yachts. And they were smug and arrogant, seeming to think they were superior to Martin. Martin felt talking to them was wasting his life. However, he did meet one guest he could connect with, a highly respected university professor. They conversed happily, and Martin found him to be very knowledgeable. Although their life experiences differed, their insights about life were similar. However, Martin spotted a flaw in the professor's thinking and pointed it out candidly. The professor was shocked by Martin's correction, but also pleased. The professor said, "The last person who pointed out his shortcomings was a scientist in evolution. But that person had passed away, and he never expected to hear similar words from young Martin." However, Martin's behavior displeased Ruth. Ruth thought Martin's behavior was rude and even felt that Martin debating such a profound professor was overestimating himself. This left Martin feeling confused and conflicted. His perception of high society began to change. Meanwhile, Martin realized his intellectual depth far exceeded Ruth's and these upper-class people, strengthening his belief in success. And then responses came for his formulaic short stories. Magazines sent checks from $5 to $40, thrilling Martin. If he continued this way, he could earn as much as a government clerk. Though he disliked writing such content for his future with Ruth, he was willing to occasionally sell writings he despised. However, Ruth disagreed. She earnestly advised Martin to take a proper job, like a government clerk or lawyer. Martin refused, causing a rift in their relationship. Ruth loved Martin for his wild spirit and steadfast determination. Yet this romantic fantasy couldn't withstand reality. She came to Martin's place to meet him, but the damp room, dirty floor and clothes, and Martin's 3-day beard stubble from writing made her feel it was unacceptable, even disgusting. Gradually, she lost confidence and patience in Martin, and they broke up. The trigger for the breakup was a socialist gathering. Martin had a friend named Brissenden, a socialist with writing talent, who got along well with Martin. Brissenden had tried persuading Martin not to fall into the love trap of fragile bourgeois ladies that would wither his talent, but Martin wouldn't listen. So Brissenden took Martin to the gathering to show him what real intellectuals were like. In fact, this gathering was a socialist meeting. Though not a socialist himself, Martin found their discussions exhilarating. Books seemed to come alive in their minds, and Martin's own speech received enthusiastic responses. Unfortunately, a rookie journalist at the gathering misunderstood the debates, but remembered Martin getting the strongest reaction. He mistakenly portrayed Martin in his report as an anarchist leader. Moreover, he exaggerated, describing attendees as wild-eyed, neurotic degenerates. The next day, Martin received Ruth's letter, filled with heartbreak and disappointment. She wrote she thought her love would make Martin pursue a serious, respectable life. She never expected Martin to do this. Her parents insisted they separate, and she now saw they were mismatched. Refusing to believe Ruth could be so cold, Martin immediately wrote back, "Just tell me one thing, do you still love me?" But Martin never received a reply from Ruth. Martin and Ruth's romance had ended. Misfortunes piled up as he learned his friend Brissenden had shot himself. His lover gone, his friend dead. Success still seemed distant. Nothing could be more disheartening. Exhausted, Martin still finished his novel Overdue. Not the formulaic works he sent magazines, but his true vision, sea life stories and cosmic reflections. As he wrote the last line of Overdue, Martin felt life had sunk into nothingness. Just at this moment, fortune suddenly smiled upon him. His first book, a collection of philosophical essays titled The Teeth of the Sun, was published by a publisher, although the publisher's editor had written in a letter that the book might not sell 1,000 copies. However, shockingly, The Teeth of the Sun became a bestseller not only in America, but also in Canada and Europe. The editor repeatedly expressed that this was incomprehensible. Nevertheless, they offered Martin high royalties, money poured in, and he even became a key client for investment advisors. Overdue was also published, and critics and readers alike praised his work enthusiastically. He became a popular writer. Magazines and publishers that had previously rejected his manuscripts wrote to say they were willing to republish those works. Martin found it extremely ironic. He sent over many poorly written poems and articles from when he was just starting to learn writing. Unexpectedly, those magazines immediately published them and sent back substantial payments. People began to ask everywhere, who on earth is Martin Eden? Many newspapers and magazines across the country competed to feature him, boasting that they were the first to discover this famous writer. Relatives who had cut ties with him and upper-class figures rushed to invite him to meals and flatter him. At this point in the story, on the surface, it seems Martin has achieved his initial dream and turned his life around. Common sense would suggest he should enjoy this hard-earned success. However, Martin felt he was sick in the mind. He found he couldn't desire anything anymore. He no longer stayed up late studying hard, nor did he learn anything new. He often walked into the mountains, spending time in the quiet, feeling that something was wrong with him. His life had stalled, but he didn't know where to find the strength to become active again. And the next two things that happened completely robbed him of hope for life. The first thing involved Ruth. After Martin's books were published, one evening, Ruth surprisingly came to see Martin. Martin, facing Ruth, felt no passion at all in his heart. Ruth pitifully reached out her hands to Martin, earnestly telling him she had come secretly without her family knowing, and eagerly threw herself into Martin's arms, snuggling up to Martin, hoping to devote herself to him, but Martin discovered Ruth was lying. He saw a familiar figure flash by nearby. It was Ruth's brother Arthur. Martin felt disdain and anger in his heart. She was putting on airs, claiming she took a big risk, but he knew full well that her brother who brought her was waiting to take her back. When I was a pauper, I wasn't even worthy of being with her sister. Now that I've got money in the bank, he sends her right to my door. Martin sobered up completely. Ruth might genuinely care for him, but in her mind, Martin's social status and wealth mattered more. Uh, What she wanted was to pull Martin into her life, like the piano in her home, the murals on the walls, or the books on the shelf. Just another shiny ornament in high society. Martin's hopes for love were utterly shattered. Another thing that hit Martin hard was his friend Brissenden's ordeal. And, it was this event that made Martin lose all desire to create. Before killing himself, Brissenden had given Martin a work he wrote called Ephemera. After reading it, Martin marveled that Ephemera was a flawless masterpiece, unmatched by any literature. It got published after Brissenden's suicide, and what infuriated Martin was how ignorant critics tore it apart without even understanding the poem, just to flaunt their own smarts. And this was the same crowd that fawned over him and praised his work after his own stuff blew up. Martin felt deep sorrow. He called book reviewers and readers the mob. Mob as in crowd. Mob as in ruffians. Meaning these folks don't get literature, they just kiss up to the winners and kick the losers. He silently predicted that, in a few months, this mob would pounce on him and tear him to shreds like they did with Ephemera. In his mind, he mocked the thousands who read his books and cheered him on. Honestly, they're like dumb animals, totally unaware that, in Martin's view, this society can't handle real art. After the brief, wild high of success, he couldn't compromise with the world anymore, and he just couldn't create. He decided to escape this society he despised, boarding a ship to the South Pacific. But right on that ship to the South Pacific, Martin threw himself into the sea, ending his life. The novel stops abruptly here, shocking readers with Martin's suicide. Yet, after calming down, reflecting makes us feel Martin's ending was inevitable. Everything he'd ever longed for had turned to disillusionment. Two pillars drove Martin's struggle in the novel: his love for Ruth and his dream of entering high society. So Martin fought tirelessly for his ideals, reading and writing day and night. Ironically, the woman he loved deeply, Ruth, always measured his success by money, just as Martin himself said. No one believed in me, except myself. When Martin started writing, Ruth said, writing can't make a living. So Martin compromised, writing third-rate stories he despised just for fees. But Ruth still urged him toward respectable jobs like lawyering. Ruth left Martin, yet after his fame and fortune, she returned to reconcile and offer herself. This made Martin realize his love was pure illusion. Ruth never truly understood Martin's talent. To her, it simply didn't matter. The kind, elegant, pure Ruth he loved didn't exist. Martin's love shattered completely. Along with love, Martin's dream of high society vanished too. Martin fell for Ruth not just for her beauty, but her elegant speech, knowledge, and refined manners. These trappings of high society made Martin yearn deeply. But through knowing Ruth, Martin realized his vision of high society was pure fantasy. True, Ruth's home had books, elegant paintings, classical piano music, but these felt like decorations just to flaunt status and class. Even with their sophisticated jargon, Ruth and her family never truly possessed depth. More profound than art, literature, or music is life itself. That's the most profound essence in Martin's work, something Ruth could never grasp. Ruth's family epitomized the hypocritical, vulgar upper class, wearing masks of open-mindedness, but in reality, they harbored narrow class prejudices. For example, at that banquet, when Martin disagreed with the professor, Ruth instantly assumed Martin was wrong and criticized him simply because the professor was successful while Martin hadn't earned ascent or fame. That's high society's entire standard. Martin began longing for his former uneducated self. That Martin lived among so-called rough sailors but was free, fighting when he wanted, strong enough to beat anyone on the docks, pursuing girls he liked, living simply with them. Martin actually met those old friends again. They drank and danced together, but Martin found his mind had changed. He couldn't reclaim that past joy. With both love and ideals shattered, life lost purpose and happiness became impossible. Martin ultimately chose suicide. Behind Martin's tragic end lies Jack London's own disillusionment with the American dream. The American dream emerged in the 18th century. Specifically, no matter how poor one's origins, hard work would bring fair opportunities to unleash innate potential, changing life and destiny. Overnight rich gold rushers, Lincoln rising from commoner to president, Rockefeller leaping from clerk to oil tycoon, all were inspirational American dream examples. By the early 20th century, when Jack London wrote Martin Eden, the American dream, originally about personal effort, had corrupted, wealth exploded, material desires swelled, money became success's sole measure. Back then, a huge neon sign flashed on New York's Columbus Circle building. By age 30, you should have $10,000. By 40, $25,000. By 50, $50,000. Money became the American dream's entire content. Capital's power and materialism even infected literature. In 1995, the bestseller list of American monthly magazine Bookman only considered sales speed and volume, completely ignoring artistic and social value, turning novel writing into an industry. American literature entered its commercial phase. When Jack London wrote Martin Eden, there were 5,100 commercial magazines in the US market. Truly the first golden age of popular reading. Many writers chasing output and income neglected quality, even giving rise to titles like Pulp King. This refers to best-selling authors who wrote dozens of novels yearly, each selling exceptionally well. Thus, handling the conflict between money and artistic creation became a dilemma many creators had to confront. Jack London deeply contemplated this issue. As a pioneer in America's cultural industry, he knew how to cater to readers and market demands. The American dream is America's most potent cultural myth. Everyone dreams of rising from rags to riches, motivating youth to strive. American schools even use American dream stories as teaching materials. So in this novel, Jack London made the American dream its theme, telling young Martin's rags to riches story. London's brilliance lay in exposing the social problems hidden behind the American dream. As Martin accuses in the novel, the 13 colonies overthrew rulers to establish a republic, only to create new masters. They weren't great, strong, or noble, just cunning merchants and loan sharks enslaving judges, parliaments, and millions of child laborers through schemes and sweet talk. London's social observations far surpassed those of his era's trashy bestseller writers. While meeting reader expectations, London broke tradition with sharp prose to depict the American dream's collapse. Martin Eden's popularity reflected London's market success and showed literary commercialization's controlling power over writing. But London's contradiction was enjoying commercial success while yearning to break free and pursue pure art. This contradiction is vividly embodied in Martin Eden. In the novel, though Martin figured out the formula for bestsellers, after seeing ephemera senselessly trampled and criticized in the literary market later in the story, he completely broke with commercialized literature, never wrote again, and jumped into the sea after his artistic ideals shattered. You could say Martin Eden is Jack London's spiritual autobiography. He fictionalized an idealized self in the novel, while real life Jack London indulged in materialism after fame. At first, he spent lavishly building a yacht to sail the Pacific, then constructed a mansion called Wolf House. To sustain this decadent lifestyle, he often took advances from publishers and churned out shoddy works to repay them. Amid this hollow existence, Jack London contemplated death. He said, "When life becomes painful and weary, death comes to lull you to sleep, never to wake again." This symbolism of death was embedded in the title Martin Eden all along. Martin comes from Latin meaning warrior. Eden means paradise in English, so the title symbolizes an American warrior seeking paradise, the book's core metaphor. But since Adam and Eve were cast from Eden, it's been an unreachable paradise for humanity. London once said of Martin Eden, "He killed himself because after his illusions vanished, life had no purpose," foreshadowing London's own disillusionment. On November 12th, 1916, Jack London died at home from a morphine overdose at 40. Well, that concludes our discussion of Jack London's Martin Eden. Reading notes are below the audio. See you next time.